Hi there. I just want to talk to you today about the concrete representational abstract sequence. And I know that sounds really daunting, but it's actually quite simple, but it's really important that we follow the sequence for when we're teaching any new number concept to our students. And we must always stay at whichever stage they are at, wherever they need the practice, before we move on to the next stage. If we do make a mistake, and that does often happen, when we move too quickly on to the next stage within a concept, we just move backwards again and let them practice more on that stage. I know that for most things in life, it feels like we'll be able to move on and do things more quickly if we just keep powering through. But with learning, it's much different. And that is particularly so for maths, and even more so for learning number. So it's really important that if students really need to be at the concrete stage of their learning in number, then they are still practicing there. And if they need to go back, then they go back. Okay, I'm going to explain what I mean by all this just now. All right, so concrete just means that you can pick up and move the objects around. So there's some counters, for example. So if we're in the concrete stage of counting, then we want our students to use real objects and say 1, 2, 3. There are 3 counters there. If they were at the representational stage of counting, we would want them to be doing something like this, looking at a dice, for example, and it has a pictorial example of the number on the dice there. So 1, 2, 3 dots. There's another example of a representational number there with 3 rectangles. Here's another example. We've got cubes here, and then the pictorial representation is just lines. So they're not using tallies yet, that's different, but they're just using lines to represent the numbers. And then here is the abstract symbols, or the digits. For concrete, you can use just about anything that is the same. So you could use paper clips for counting, or addition, or whichever concept you're teaching. You could use screws. You could use, I've got lots of these thingies for some reason, so I could use those. You could use buttons, you can use sticks, whatever you like that you've got the same, or lots of the same. So we were talking about counting, so we'd already talked about counting actually. So once they start learning addition, you'd go back again to concrete, even though they've learned counting with numbers. So you're absolutely positive that they know what 2 means, and they could put out 2 counters or draw 2 dots to represent that number, and they know what that means, and they know what all of the other numbers mean up to 10, for example. You'd go back to the concrete stage again for the next concept. So let's say they're doing addition now. And there are lots and lots of things that we need to assess them on before we can say, yep, they're ready to move on to addition and subtraction. And that takes quite some time. So addition, we'd have maybe 2 and then 1. So this is our concrete. There's 2 here plus another 1. How many are there all together? And the student says 1, 2, 3. Or they can say that's 2, 3, counting on. 4 again, addition. We've got 2 paper clips over here and 2 paper clips over here. How many paper clips are there all together? And if they can say that's 4, that's good. You can transfer that skill from counters to paper clips. So we'd want them to be able to transfer the skill to lots and lots of different situations and know lots of the different things about numbers before they start doing this stage. So the representational stage of addition would be, okay, we've got 2 dice. One has 2 dots and the other one shows 2 dots. How many dots are there altogether? So that's an example of our representational stage. Another example of the representational stage would be to draw 2 lines and then draw another 2 lines over here and say how many lines are there altogether, and they can say 4. So they need to be able to do that for all numbers and for all number combinations that are possible, and lots of other things that we look for as well, which I'll ask for videos of. So the abstract stage of addition would look something like this. But of course they need to know what these mean and what they represent before we can let them do that. So on this page, for example, if they're in kindy, or even if they're in pre-primary, it doesn't really matter how old they are, I would need to be able to see that they can do all of these activities with real objects and that they've been assessed on lots of different things before I let them do it with pictures. So anything that you see to do with numbers in the targeting maths book, I want you to do it with counters or real objects. It's okay for them to practice their writing their numbers or tracing their numbers and saying what the number is. That's fine. And then we can connect those things together later. But more important than learning their digits at the moment would be to be able to count in the sequence from 1 to 10. So when we count, we need to make sure that we count in order. We only count each item once, and the last item we count tells us our total.